to Psychedelic Odyssey, the show where our guests tell us fascinating details about their most amazing experiences taking psychedelic drugs. I'm your host, Jim Leonard. Our first guest is Ed. Welcome to the show, Ed.
Thank you, Jim.
You're going to be telling us about an LSD experience, is that right?
Yes, that's true.
Okay. And how long ago was this experience?
It's about 16 years now.
Uh-huh. And what season of the year was it?
It was in the summer, yeah.
In the summer?
Yeah.
And where were you for this trip?
I was in Amsterdam.
In the city?
Yeah,
Yep.
in Amsterdam.
Mm-hmm. And what did the LSD itself look like when you took it?
It was a piece of carton, and there was a Superman drawn on it.
A Superman stamped blotter. Okay, that's great. And what time of day did you take it?
It was on the, I think, it was in the middle of the day, about 12 o'clock.
About 12 o'clock?
Yeah.
Okay. And what was the first thing that you noticed when you started to feel the effects?
Well, the first thing I noticed, actually, that I didn't struggle against it, because first I thought it was a little bit weird, but then also I realized that I took a trip because I forgot it. And then suddenly, when I was staring at the ceiling, I saw the ceiling change, and suddenly the ceiling was totally vanished, and I could look through the ceiling, and I saw the sky. And
wow, you were inside, and you could look at the ceiling and see through it and see the sky. That's amazing.
And the stars.
And so you knew that something was happening.
Yeah, and when I looked down, I saw myself also sitting in the room, but I was also traveling.
And so you had your eyes closed at this point, huh?
No.
You had your eyes open,
Yeah.
and you experienced traveling. Okay.
So that's why I knew also that I was tripping, because I wasn't dreaming.
Right. And was this your first experience taking LSD?
No, this was my second.
Your second experience.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also with a couple of friends, they were there too.
You had friends who took it at the same time?
Yeah.
Okay. And so you already had this experience of traveling and looking through the ceiling and this. Just tell us what happened after this.
Well, it was a very nice experience, and I also had experiences I never had before, so I could smell colors.
Wow.
I could see emotions, I could see auras, everything that, I used to be skeptical about suddenly happened, I really had that contact with supernatural things. What we call supernatural, actually it's natural.
Yeah. Wow, that's pretty amazing. And did you feel safe during these experiences? Did you have any fear with these things?
Well, while I was with my friends, I felt very safe,
Mm-hmm.
It's very, you could stay in contact with people and they share their experiences. But as soon as I had a certain urge to leave, I went to the city, and I shouldn't do that.
You left your friends behind,
Yeah.
and you went by yourself to the city.
Yeah.
While you were very high on LSD.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so tell us what that was like for you, being in the city by yourself, tripping.
Well, first, it was very, very, like being in heaven. I was walking on clouds, actually, and everything was had a very big impact, very, very big impact. The flowers were like flowers from another planet. Like the things you see in science fiction movies. The vegetation was different, the colors were different, the people moved different, and I saw them in several phases, like you see on films, in slow motion, and suddenly you see the movement of the movement. I couldn't explain it, actually.
Well, this all sounds great. And so during this time, after you left your friends and went into the city by yourself, it sounds like all of this was also comfortable and interesting and beautiful. But did it continue like that?
No, it didn't continue, because I forgot one golden rule. I didn't eat and drink.
Oh, I see.
And I just remembered I did drink a little bit, But yeah, that wasn't enough to survive. I was so overwhelmed by my impressions.
Ah.
I didn't even realize. And then suddenly, yeah, things did turn around, because I heard a certain voice also say to me, so you know now what heaven is, let's show you the other place.
You heard a voice in your head that said this to you?
Yeah, well, even several voices, but I didn't give much attention to them. But that one voice was very, very scary.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so it said, now you've seen heaven and we're going to show you hell, and then things changed right away, huh?
Well, not even the words heaven or hell, actually.
Uh-huh.
Because that would make it even more, yeah. No, it made it even more scary, because what you could have a picture of.
Yeah.
But I didn't know what was going to come now, because...
And so did things change suddenly from heaven into this more uncomfortable part of the trip, or was that...
No, not suddenly, but very creepy, actually.
Uh-huh.
I first came in a kind of twilight zone, and I went to the Fondel Park, and I looked on the ground, and I saw all kinds of symbols.
Wow.
And they all gave me a certain direction, and they all gave me a certain thought to think about. And in the trees, I also saw, yeah, things like in a fairy tale, you know, that trees suddenly could come to life.
Wow.
And I was just sitting on a chair, and I saw those trees turning into monsters, really, with very big claws and blood on it, and really monsters. And I said, hey, there's something wrong, but I concentrated again, and then the trees became normal. But
so with concentration, you can make these hallucinations disappear and go, things could look normal with an act of will.
yeah, but even so, I did get in a panic a certain way, because suddenly I didn't realize where I was. I know I'm in the Fondel Park, but I wasn't in the Fondel Park, because it was a total different place.
And how long after you dropped the acid was this phase of the trip, do you think?
Well, it took about a day, because I didn't sleep also.
So wait, so I mean this uncomfortable phase that you entered here, you suppose that was 3 hours after you dropped, or how?
No, a day after. No, wait, no, sorry. About 8 hours after.
This is 8 hours after you took it.
Yeah.
It must have been a heck of a big dose. Okay, so go on with your narrative. So now it's the early part of the evening then when this is taking place, huh?
Well, 8 hours after? No, 8 o'clock.
That's what I mean. Okay, 8 o'clock in the evening. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, and so continue telling us what this was like. So you saw the trees turn into monsters. With an act of will, you could make them look like trees again, and it didn't seem like you were in the Fondel Park, even though you knew that's where you were.
But when I did it, I also heard that voice that said, well, you think you're so powerful that you could destroy my monsters, but you're not so powerful, because other things could happen too. And I looked into the sky, and I saw into the clouds. I saw also two huge figures fighting with each other. Two figures with the face of Gandhi and the face of Hitler.
Wow.
And Gandhi was on my side and trying to convince me to say, hey man, what you're doing is wrong, and you have to stay on the good path. And Hitler was saying, no, you must not listen to him, because I'm going to destroy you and everything. So it was very, very weird. And I really got in a panic. And even people passing through the park were looking at me, but they were looking very scared, because I look very scared, I think.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be a very frightening experience.
But suddenly I realized, well, I have to do something. So I went to my home, and there were some people who, they just said, well, just take it easy, eat something, drink something, and it will be all right. And the next day, yeah.
And so you did. You ate something, you drank something, and things started to settle down a little bit, huh?
Yeah, but still I was very upset. But even though I had this experience, I think it was very good because I know now what's the lowest point and what's the highest point. I know it could even get higher, but it could never get so low anymore.
And so in this single LSD trip, first you experienced heaven, everything looked really heavenly and beautiful, and then it changed somehow and you really saw hell.
Yeah.
And then after that you started to come down a little bit, I guess, because you were eating something and drinking something. It was many hours after you dropped.
Yeah,
so now it's...
The next day, actually, also.
So did you sleep that night after you came down?
No, I didn't sleep that night.
You didn't sleep. You were up all night with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so then how did you feel the next day?
Well, the next day, I really continued on, actually, in opening doors, because that door that I opened, that was a door that never been opened before for me.
Yeah.
I could never imagine that there is so much that you can't imagine, because even though I have a creative mind, I like to create things, but even though to know that some things you can't create with your fantasy, that's something that, I just can't stand. But it's true, and there are things that you never could explain, and there are a lot of doors, and sometimes you got a chance to open some doors, but you'll never pass through the total way because you can't survive that. It's too much knowledge for one person.
Yeah, and so so the next day you must have felt tired, I suppose, among other things.
Tired, exhausted, but also, I had a certain thing back for it. I had so much knowledge that, I was very glad also, and I had energy back in return for it also.
And did you feel like you had insights and benefits that stayed with you after this?
Oh, yes, yes.
Wow.
Surely. But even so, it's strange to say, but I can't tell people that it's good or bad.
Yeah.
But I do say it's an experience that a grown-up in the Western world should have, actually.
Yeah, you felt that it was valuable to you, and
it was my karma too, I think. It was my karma too.
And so you found it beneficial, even though it had some uncomfortable moments.
Yeah. But I don't know if I would do it again, but in that way, But I don't think that you could repeat that either. But you could, if you prepare things. That's why it's called also a trip. People shouldn't underestimate that trip, because if you take a trip to a certain country, you also prepare. You take your luggage, you take your food, everything, and you prepare it. But if you drop a trip, it's just not, taking a trip. No, you have to prepare it. You have to put things in your house that give you a safe feeling.
Yeah.
You have to have people in the house that you can talk to. And I would advise, don't just walk on the street alone. Always have some people with you that you know you can trust.
Yeah. Well, good. Okay. Is there anything else you want to tell us about that particular trip?
Well, no, not especially, because it's very hard to describe that. The emotions were so quick, actually. The pictures were, and the emotions and everything, and trying to keep yourself together. It's very hard to describe also. I don't have time enough to describe that trip.
It's impossible to capture every detail, that's for sure.
Because it's about a period of 16 hours or even 24 hours.
Right.
You can't describe that in a couple of sentences.
That's right. Yeah, well, you've done a really nice job of sharing this fascinating trip with heaven and hell.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for being on the program.
Yeah, thank you.
Great guest. Thanks.
Okay.
And our next guest is Mike. Mike, it's great you could be here with us. And you're going to tell us about your first acid trip, is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Oh. And how long ago did this trip take place?
About 30 years ago.
Uh-huh. And do you remember what time of year this trip took place?
68.
No, I mean, which season of the year? Summer or fall?
Spring, summertime,
Uh-huh.
about, yeah.
Yeah. And where did this take place?
On the country, it was a place called Eefde. It's nearby Zutphen, in
Mm-hmm. So in the
the
countryside.
Veluwe area here in
Mhm.
Holland.
Yep.
Mhm.
And what did the actual LSD look like?
Well, it was a very little, as far as I remember, redly orange pill.
Uh-huh.
As you have now, look a bit like microdot, maybe a little bigger, and it was called California Sunshine.
Yes? Okay.
Um,
That sounds like an orange barrel, maybe something. Okay.
mm.
All right. And do you have an estimate of how many micrograms that might have been?
I don't know it all.
Okay.
I don't know it all.
All right. And do you remember what it was like when you first started to feel something from it?
Yes. It happened somehow very naturally. It was just like something started happening, and it was just like, hey, something from inside straight recognized, hey, this is something different, and this is something never told before. This is, now I better stay with this because something now is going on. It looks like I get a pretty inside look. Well, that was actually straight from the beginning. That was there. There was some kind of, I got aware of a miracle as my own life and the life around me.
Yeah.
I start seeing life as something, as it never had been pinpointed out to me, but it looked like I got in contact with the most important part of life. As
Wow.
myself, the living thing that's present in everything, and it looked like by all at that time educated to me and pinpointed out to me as what I was and as what I was thinking of myself. That got at that moment, yeah, I knew, hey, something, this is special, it's very special.
Well, so you started to have a spiritual kind of experience shortly after you took it, huh?
Well, it was like I lived in that time in an, how you call that, children farm, education home.
Mm-hmm.
I was about shortly before 17, I think. Yeah. And yeah, we actually took the thing, and the boys had told me, "Hey, here, this is something nice. I think you will like it." And we go for a walk, and we went on a walk in a beautiful countryside there, and just as in the walk, I think it took about half an hour. I was not into time. I was not into checking a clock. I hadn't watched.
Sure.
We were just going up the countryside. We had a nice smoke. We had very nice grass on us. Yeah, at once it happened that at once this tree that I already liked, but what before that time was to me just a brown stick with a green top, and of course all the leaves, but at once the tree became really alive. I start to be aware that the tree was a living thing, something, a living being as I am. I saw the breath coming into everything, and at once it was just like I could see every leaf, every nerve of the leaves. I could see the molecules in the air. I could see every pore of my skin. I could see everything is alive, everything is breathing, everything. It was an incredible experience. It was
Wow, that's great. When you were coming onto this, did you go through any fear? Were you afraid of the drug at all as you were?
No, not at all.
Not at all. Yeah.
It looked like the guys I was with, they had already a little experience. The quality, as now I can talk about quality of the LSD, must have been very, very good and very good dosed.
Mm-hmm.
I was in company of people I trusted,
Mm-hmm.
people I shared my life with in that time, and I had faith with. I could share my tears and my laughs.
Yeah.
And so there was, and then a beautiful day in a beautiful environment. And that was for me, yeah. There was no fear, there was nothing. I think that came later, not for me, but that also scary things could happen, or that you can get loose with reality. To some people, I had, for example, this is then about another trip, but that we were in the park and having really a beautiful experience, all of the other people for the first time. And we walk out the park, and in front of us, an accident happened.
Oh.
And it's like when you're tripping, it's like adrenaline or whatever it is, but the whole accident was like slow motion.
Uh-huh.
We could hear the cries coming out the car, the metal scratching, and things that happen in a second was there just like as the time disappears and you experience the whole thing. Everything that happened in that accident in this 1 second, it's to these people out of this beautiful paradise they were, you could call, at once something happened, and that was very difficult for them because they were in a kind of conscious that from now on these things were not happening anymore. Yeah. And you have to stay on the floor, you have to stay in the life. I mean, it's still the same life, only you get aware what is alive.
Yeah.
What is always,
And so going back to this first trip, so were you with your friends through the entire experience?
You could say the first 4 or 5 hours, yes. And then, because we had to go back for the food, and that was in a group with 12 boys, and we were with four boys. We took the trip and went on the countryside, and 2 of them were sitting in another group. So with the other 2, I entered in this group where the other 9 boys lived, where I lived with together, and the leaders and everything, and the food on the table. And I started eating my soup, and I was feeling like, wow, I was feeling great. To me, there was nothing strange. There was a perspective more to life, and for me, everything was normal. Uh-huh. I mean, it became even more normal. And I was just everybody. I could even be more happy seeing all the other fellows I live with and just sitting there. Oh, and now comes the food, and even the food was more enjoyable. And the only thing that happened then was we had of this soup comes, and I was sitting there, and everybody was watching me, or the 2 other guys, they were watching me, and probably they had told the others, so everybody was watching me of the boys from, oh wow, what's going on with Mike? And I was watching back, what are they looking to me? While I was having my soup, like drinking like this and watching around like that. So I'm still drinking, the soup goes all here, but I'm not looking, I'm just looking, what are you all looking at me? And that thing was happening. Then the leader got a bit suspicious too. Mike, what's going on? Oh yes. Okay. I just went cleaning it
And this part, how many hours after you dropped was this part where you were eating?
I think about 6 hours.
6 hours.
6 hours, and I think, like I told you, most of the soup went on me instead of in me, and I haven't eaten further on then. Everybody was laughing, and I just was cleaning myself. Nobody was thinking about I had to eat more or suspicious about it.
Yeah. And and so, did you sleep okay that night, or did it keep you awake after you ate supper and after you?
Well, the thing is, I slept very good, not so long. And where I lived in that time, I was already for a long time used to about 3 hours sleep a night, 4 hours. That was the maximum. Because 11 o'clock when we had to go to bed, that was the time we could all gather in the rooms and start have our smoking sessions, and that went on till 3, 4 o'clock.
I see.
So that was this day, same, and at 7 o'clock you had to be out there again.
And so as you were coming down from this trip, you were smoking dope with your friends and having a nice time like that? And then you slept for a few hours?
And having something that was there, that realized me after, that is why it's a trip, or there's a thing, but of knowing it all, not knowing it all, but some things from now on, because you not want to forget. And then slowly the days after, you realize that you had a very fine experience and something very nice. But some of the things that were then very clear, they are somehow inside still very clear, but not able to verbally express or to somehow...
Sure.
There is already something also again that is, what was it? How was it again? Because I also had beautiful visual, many colors, flowers, everything. You saw them opening up, closing.
Wow, that sounds great. And so the next day you felt reasonably normal, huh?
Well, actually a little better.
A little better. A
little further, a little more something there nobody ever could take away from me, and something that definitely still was going on.
Yeah. And so you had some...
I was for days in this trip somehow, you could say.
And did you have some insights and benefits that stayed with you after you came down from this trip?
Well, I think as already did this experience never left me again. Yeah. It made me aware of something, there's something more, and I was also very aware that this little thing was a little helper, but that the experience I got was about something that is always like that. Flowers are always opening up like that. The grass is always growing. You can hear the grass drinking in the morning dew. That is always hearable. It is always visible. But the only thing is, how many times do I look to it? How many times be I with it? And then the thing is, who is looking? Some of all this beauty, there's something even more beauty, and that is in me. And the more I can get to that, what is in me that makes me able to be more present with this presence. That was all what I wanted. That was all what why I took after LSD again, to like getting good directions. And
so this made you at least more sensitive to nature. For sure more sensitive to nature, it sounds like, huh?
Yeah, to the whole life. To the whole, there were already some things clear, but it made something... it was like something very deep inside. You actually nobody ever paid attention to it. So whenever this voice was there, you didn't pay attention to it also. And then it comes out, and hey man, this is the most important voice in your life. This is your own voice. This is your thing inside. This is something talking, whatever is talking there, this you have to listen always to. And man, that was very, and that is still a benefit, because it is one of the things helped me on my walk.
Yeah. So a strong, powerful spiritual experience for you, huh?
Very, very.
And very pleasant, it sounds like.
Very pleasant.
Very pleasant.
That's why I also cannot really, because it was also so natural that the days after I cannot really say I was tripping for so long or I was... Because from the moment it happened, everything starts fitting into place. From inside, from the moment it started, everything was picture clear. I did not know why, maybe I could not express it in the words, but everything was picture clear. Life, harmony. It's not something you can build. Harmony is there. It's there right now. What the fucking hell am I doing with my life? Or whatever am I doing, I'm into something that is not pinpointing out this, but I have to be busy with this. Because in this, there is peace, everything is there. It looks like we have been wrong directed. That was my experience.
That's fantastic. We really appreciate you sharing this with us. Thanks a lot for being on the program.
That's it. You too. That's nice. I liked it.
Thanks. Our next guest is Chris. Welcome to the show, Chris. It's great to have you with us.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
And you're going to be sharing with us about an LSD experience, is that right?
That's right, yeah. There was from 3 years ago, and I'd already taken acid before that. But up until then, I hadn't had one that was so strong and had such an effect on me. Previously to that, I hadn't had overwhelming effects of the mind, merely physical effects from the acid.
Okay, I want to ask you a little bit about the set and setting of the trip. And so, what time of year was this trip?
I think it was in the summer. I'm not very good at remembering dates, though. At the time, it was a time when my parents had left the home, and my elder brother, was at home alone, kind of running the show. And at that period of that few weeks, he was eating mushrooms, and he had some other acid as well. And I was at a boarding school at this point. Now, my brother came to Plymouth, and when he met me, he said to me, "Stick your tongue out," and he placed an acid trip on my tongue.
I see.
Yeah, and I was with this anyway. I mean, I was going along. It wasn't like he'd spiked me. But I had no idea what level of acid I was taking. I was still quite young and quite naive to it.
So since he put it on your tongue, did you have a chance to see the trip itself?
I didn't look at it, no.
You didn't look at it, okay.
No.
But apparently a blotter?
He said it was a Buddha, yeah, which is a type of acid that I've read stories about before, a laughing or smiling Buddha.
A stamped blotter, basically, right?
I expect it was.
Okay.
I imagine it was. Yeah.
All right. And do you have any sense of how many micrograms this might have been?
Oh, I've got no knowledge of that, of
Okay.
kind of LSD thing.
All right. And what time of day did you take it?
It must have been at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it took about half an hour before I could feel all of the muscles in my body becoming rigid, and it came up very, very quickly in comparison to other drugs or LSD that I'd taken before that, where it had taken up to an hour long to take it. But
And so within a half an hour, you started to feel tension in your body?
I was in
or
the
something?
car on the way back, and my brother and his friend, a friend of my brother's who I'd never met before, were driving, and they didn't seem to be at all affected by it, but I was quietly sitting in the back. 20 minutes, half an hour into it, I felt incredibly flushed and hot and claustrophobic. Wow. And I was pushing my hands against one of the windows of each side of the car, and saying to my brother that we had to get home so I could get out very quickly, because I was really getting flummoxed by this acid.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so coming on was uncomfortable for you?
Yeah,
it
was a bad trip. This is the story that I'm giving you. It's
okay.
a trip which was predominantly negative effects for me.
Okay.
But I'll give you a carry on the story. When we arrived at the home, I was just getting to know my brother's friend, who seemed like a bit of a strange guy. He was trying to kind of scare me in certain ways that I could tell. But as soon as I'd only just met the guy, as soon as we walked into the house, he put this packet of crisps up on the counter, on the dresser, and he turned to me and he said, "If you eat those crisps, I'll kill you." And I didn't think anything of it, but I just that my brother and him went into a different room. And I was beginning to come up on this acid, and I was moving my arms like this to look at the tracer patterns that come off so I could begin to enjoy myself. And absent-mindedly scooped up these crisps and walked into the garden. Now, as I was walking into the garden, this voice came echoing through my head, "If you eat this crisps, I'm going to kill you." And it was incredibly clear and succinct. I could understand everything that this voice meant, that it was literally going to happen. And I started thinking, I know that I'm on acid. I know that I'm being affected by this. It's obvious that this guy won't kill me. Then the next thing I saw was this guy running towards me across the grass, and all of a sudden it was like all the energy in my body suddenly told me that I was going to die very soon, but this guy was going to kill me.
Wow.
And my brother came running out behind him too, and I thought they're both going to kill me. And this overwhelming feeling of terrifiedness led me to kind of turn around and start running as fast as I could towards the exit of the garden. And my brother and friend ran, and they grabbed me and held and pinned me down because I was becoming epileptic or something. I was freaking right out, and it took only a few minutes for them to completely calm me down and assure me that it was just, you know, a preliminary thing of the, you know, effect of the acid, that I'd been overtaken by it and it actually had too strong an effect on me.
Yeah. And so all of this was very early in the trip.
This is all in the first hour of
within
the trip.
The first hour, yeah.
We hadn't actually done anything. My brother and his friend, I'd literally just met them, and they'd gone off to do something else. And because they'd already been taking acid and they'd already been eating mushrooms and had bottles of vodka and, you know, bags of grass and things, I would left them to their own devices and went to try and experience the trip for myself.
I see. And so you left them behind?
Well, I went to the garden, and I had perpetual noises in my head. Even after this voice, there was sounds that I could hear that I couldn't determine whether they were really there or not. It was impossible for me to make an objective decision about. There was a police siren, something that I've had on previous trips, and it was impossible for me to know whether the siren was there or not. Even every 10 minutes, I had to reevaluate whether it was, because I was so paranoid that the police might come.
Wow. Even
though this house is very isolated, it's a half an hour walk from the nearest house, a 10-acre property. It's ideal for this kind of thing. But at that particular time, there was various things. The fact that I'd been in school and that I was having a bad time there, and the fact that I'd just taken this acid as I saw my brother. There was no run-up to it. I had no time to prepare. Yeah, that's right, no preparation time. And the fact that there was a storm on that night as well. And that was the later part of the trip. I came to believe that the more I was freaking out, the worse the weather was becoming, and that my emotions were literally controlling the weather. And I would say to my brother, look, I can make thunder happen, watch this. And I'd run out and kind of shout outside, and thunder and lightning were coming, and we could see it. It was purple, bright purple, like nothing I've ever seen. The whole sky was lit up with purple lightning every 5 seconds. And there were other people there, you know, who were unaffected by this. But I was 100% convinced that I could change the weather. I could even make it go sunny if I wanted to. I just had to enjoy myself on this acid. But it was becoming more and more difficult to concentrate on anything.
And so when you were having this experience with the weather, how long was this after you dropped?
I imagine, I mean, the whole trip together lasted 10 to 12 hours. So I imagine it was, you know, 4, 5, 6 hours into it in the night time.
And so at that time, you were still coming on stronger, huh?
I was still peaking 6 or 7 or 8 hours into it. And you know, it's a 4-hour come down, which I could hardly feel because we were all so intoxicated. So yeah, I mean, even 6, 7 hours into it, I was still having the maximum effect of it.
And so after this this experience with feeling like you could change the weather with your emotions, what happened next after that?
Well, I'm not quite 100% sure of the exact order. After all, it was 3 years ago. But at one point, I went into the toilet with my headphones on. And I was sitting in the toilet listening to some music, which sounded quite strange, because I was trying to blank out the noises that were subliminal on the acid, with this police siren and other things like that. Yeah. And this seemed to work. It's creating other noises in my mind. But I'd been sitting on the toilet for maybe 5-10 minutes, and suddenly, beyond the headphones, I could hear this incredible shouting and banging, which really scared me. You know, so I took the headphones off, and I could hear my brother was freaking out outside the room, saying, "What's the matter?" You know, he'd assumed that I'd fallen over and brained myself or something terrible had happened, and him and his friend, they were going crazy out there. So I pulled my trousers up and I opened the door there and then, you know, because that's the sort of thing you do when you're tripping. You don't sort of you don't open the door and say, "Don't worry, everything's fine." As soon as I opened the door, him and his friend came straight in. They came straight into the bathroom and began to turn the taps on, and they were saying, "Look at this," and they started playing with the water. And up till then, I'd never done anything like this before. I'd always been content to just look at what was around me. But stuck one hand in the cold tap and one hand in the hot tap. And we'd feel that. And even though the hot tap was scalding hot, there was absolutely no pain and no damage to the hand. There was no, you know, we had a hand in like almost boiling water with steam pouring off it. And then we'd switch hands like this. And it created this like incredible confusion. I mean, it does it anyway, whether you're tripping or not, but that was an incredible effect. We began to pour water down in the bath, and we could watch it falling in thousands of colours. And we did that for like 10, 15 minutes, and we were fascinated by the water. And
these 10 or 15 minutes, I imagine, seemed even longer when you were tripping, huh?
That's right. I mean, it was kind of unmeasurable time period. The same thing that was amusing to me, because I'd been in this bathroom crapping, and my brother and his friend had come in, and they were they had no concern about this at all. There seemed to be no levels of social barriers which could be broken on this acid. I mean, people were coming, people were going, saying the most. I mean, this friend of my brother's, is incredibly rude, not rude, but a kind of affronting person, you know. And he kept saying things to me which really were designed specifically to intensify the effect of the acid, which I didn't like, because in the past I'd always been with sympathetic people who were almost like maternal in their looking after you while you were tripping, because it's very easy to slide into this negative feeling thing where the acid is something you're fighting rather than something that's helping you. And this is what happened on this Buddha trip.
And so after this experience of playing with the water and seeing colors in the water and all of this, what happened next?
We played snooker. I remember that. I remember that much, and that was pretty amazing. We had I could see on the table, I could see like dotted lines, which were, it's like when you watch a game of snooker on the BBC, they show you occasionally computer representations of where the balls will go if they take a certain shot. And I could hold my cue on the table, and I could create these lines by holding the cue there. And when I took the cue away, everything apart from where the cue was what I could see, and I could just hit the ball. And I got the highest break I've ever played in the game.
Wow.
Yeah, and I was tripping off the fact that I was playing so well, you know, and I had this kind of enormous ego thing where I kind of knew subliminally that I'd get every shot in, even though I wasn't winning the game. I had a few breaks here and a few amazing spells. I had this kind of feeling that I was absolutely unstoppable, and any shot I attempted, however difficult, however bizarre, would still work perfectly.
And so in this snooker game, you experienced actually being more coordinated and more capable.
It had an intensification I've had that from most acid trips, a kind of intensification of any feeling that you have. If you see a straight line, it's almost like the line becomes more straight.
And how long after you dropped was this snooker game you played so well?
Hours, probably 8 hours into it.
Like 8 hours, okay.
Yeah.
So at that point you're coming down.
Well, I'd say the come down probably started after 10 hours of it, but it wasn't so much a come down as an enormous kind of attempt to nullify the effects of the acid, because I was really, by this time I really wanted out, and I wasn't feeling that any sobriety at all. So we were drinking and we were smoking, and
we were trying
to take away the effect of it, and eventually all of us were in bed, like lying in individual beds, still tripping our minds out at about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning or something.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get to sleep. My mind was racing with these mad ideas, so I began to kind of draw this psychedelic picture.
Uh-huh.
And that's where I first got the idea, really, for the type of pictures which I draw now, which are based on the effects that you get from looking at things on acid.
Wow. And so you didn't sleep that night?
Well, I obviously slept eventually, but I can't remember the run into being asleep at all. I can remember being terrified of never being able to fall asleep again, and the fact that the acid might last forever as well, because that's a story that I'd heard before, that could happen.
And so then after more or less trying to come down and go to sleep with your mind racing and not being able to sleep, then you created some art. Yeah,
I created some pictures from that, which I looked at afterwards, and seemed to make a lot more sense to me than when I'd been drawing them. At the time, it was a random thing, and that's the effects that I got from the acid were like that, in that I would be randomly attracted to different things for different amounts of time. Everything became down to a random denominator. There seemed to be no level of interest or level of seeing or hearing or any sensual level that I wasn't into exploring to the maximum. So things that would seem very childish to some normal people became incredibly fascinating to us. Mm-hmm. You know, we kind of look in books as if they were, you know, the Bible, our Bible, even though the next day we wouldn't even give them a glance. These facts had this enormous relevance, and the synchronicity of what was happening was everything seemed tied up in some way, and you could, looking at someone's eye, you could understand exactly how that had affected them. You didn't have to say it. It was almost like telepathy. My brother understood completely what was happening in my head. And he'd kind of go like this, and one gesture, I'd understand exactly what he'd been thinking to say for the last 10 minutes. Or I'd understand that I thought that was going to happen in my mind.
Wow.
Trying to decide between the two, he was, like I said, him and his friend, they were winding me up. They were trying to intensify it. For example, by coming into the room and saying something that wasn't necessarily an actual proper piece of speech. It was just slurred and kind of, it meant nothing. But when you're on acid, you don't expect people to do this. You know, he's kind of coming in and going, this, and I kind of go, what did you say? And he was doing this for a long time, you know, before I could actually fully grasp it, you know, and then laugh with it. But because you're on acid, the humour is taken away. The level of humour that is self-created. Another person's joke seems incredibly banal.
Okay, and the next day, how did you feel?
I'm pretty sure that the effect afterwards was gone. Okay. Every acid trip I've taken, I've never felt a long-lasting effect from it.
And did you have any insights or benefits that stayed with you after this trip?
I made up my mind on that trip that I would never drop acid again. But since that day, I've dropped it quite a few times, and I've had other acid trips which have been almost as bad. But overall, that kind of it showed me in my mind how to be responsible when you have other members of the house and responsibility to look after. That you can't completely negate what you're doing. You have to concentrate 100% on the fact that you're taking acid. The mistake I made was to put my faith in my brother and that he would help me, because it wasn't enough.
Right.
It's much more powerful than any sibling contact or any friendship that you might have with someone. I'm sure of that. It completely transcends you to a psychological state where you almost feel that you've understood everything in their mind and they've understood everything in your mind. So there's no point in discussing the acid trip. You have the kind of looking at each other and understanding everything that there is to understand about what you're doing.
So even though there were many interesting things, most of this trip was uncomfortable for you, it sounds like.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Okay.
Physically, I felt my muscles had strychnine in them.
Uh-huh.
If I bent, it would take a long time for me to move. I also felt very unclean, and towards the end of the acid, I had a bath where I was scrubbing myself, and I was convinced that there was blotches of dirt on me, which is another psychological thing. I stopped doing it quite quickly after I'd got in the bath. And when I got out of the bath, I was all soapy and all kind of slippery and slidey. And it felt like putting clothes on, and I couldn't dry myself properly. It felt like putting clothes on was really disgusting, you know. So I just had pants on, and I walked into the living room where my brother and his friend were watching television or doing something completely banal and boring on this acid. And I just had these pants on, and they were saying, "Oh, why have you got pants on? You look ridiculous," you know. And I was saying, "Well, I don't like anything touching me. It feels really uncomfortable if I touch material or anything." Yeah. And that lasted right up till the end of the trip as well. I felt physically very out of place with reality. Hardly feel pain, but I could feel things touching me. But I could also, there was no sensation of pain. There was no contact with my skin. I seemed to be in this kind of void world where I'd walk around and there was like an energy of gas, or some gas was surrounding me by about an inch. Everything I touched, it kind of felt as if I touched it before I'd actually touched it, if you understand me.
Yeah, wow. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
All right, well, Chris, you're a great guest, and
Thanks
we really appreciate you being on the show.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, man. Our next guest is Jeff. Jeff, it's great to have you on the show. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Jim.
And you're going to tell us about an experience with PCP, which is also known as angel dust, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And so when did this take place?
This took place, let's see, it would have been about 1991.
Okay.
In Chicago.
In Chicago. And what time of year was this?
This was,
what season?
This would have been the beginning of the summer, I guess, just after school had let out.
Okay, in Chicago. And what did the PCP look like?
Actually, we got it in a liquid form instead of the typical angel dust crystal.
Uh-huh. So it was a little vial of
right.
Clear liquid?
Yeah.
Okay. And then how did you use it?
Well, what we'd do is we'd roll up a small joint and dip the very tip, maybe a half a centimeter, into the liquid, and then stick it in your mouth and blow it back through the joint, and then smoke it, from the end you dipped in.
Okay. Yep. And how many people took PCP with you at this time?
At this particular time, it was just me and a friend of mine.
And so the two of you shared one joint laced with PCP?
Right. And it was pretty heavily dipped. It was a strong one. And
Did you feel something from it almost immediately?
Yeah. Within about 3 or 4 minutes after you start to smoke the joint, you start to feel the effects.
And what would be the first effects that you noticed on this particular occasion?
Sound distortion, and you start to feel a little numbing your extremities, your arms and your legs. Moving your arms up and down feels weird. Walking.
Okay.
Just about anything you do feels funny.
And so within just a few minutes you're having, I guess, would you describe it as a big rush from it? Was it like that?
It's almost, it begins as a rush, and then it becomes almost an out-of-body experience to where you're sitting there kind of watching yourself from the inside, and you don't have the same control over yourself that you normally do.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like you're watching yourself in a movie.
Right.
But you're there at the same time, too.
And as you were coming onto this, like during the rush, did you have any fear with it, or discomfort, or what's that like?
I guess the biggest fear we had was about 2 hours into it. We were really, really high, and we had walked to a Dunkin' Donuts to get some food. And about halfway back, we decided that it was the trip was just too heavy, and we needed to sit down and rest and just collect ourselves. And after about 2 hours of sitting there on the curb next to the side of the road, we had forgotten whether we had actually made it over to get food or not. So we decided we better walk back again.
Uh-huh.
And when we got back for food again, the lady recognized us, and so we knew we had already been there. And
let's go back to just after you smoked it, during the period when you're coming on. During that time, did you have hallucinations?
More tunnel vision and things like where you feel if you've ever gone unconscious slowly.
Huh.
It's almost like you're on the brink of that. You
Wow.
know, well, like where the blackness starts to close in. It'd start to do that just a little bit, and then it'd stop, and you kind of sit there half passed out for a minute going, whoa.
Okay. And were you still able to talk and communicate with your friends during the tunnel vision and during that?
Yeah, it was a little bit distorted, but since we were all distorted together,
Right.
it worked real well between us.
Mm-hmm.
But when it came to dealing with other people that were straight, for instance, the woman at the donut counter, it was pretty difficult. We had a hard time with that, just getting out that one and something to drink was difficult.
And so on this occasion, at least, the angel dust had the effect of messing up your coordination and your ability to speak and some of those things.
Yeah, it seemed very imperative. However, I don't know that it was necessarily as imperative as it seemed to us.
Yeah.
Because later on in the afternoon, I had to deal with some police officers, and it went much better than I thought it would.
Yeah. Okay. So about 2 hours after you smoked the PCP, you went to the Dunkin' Donuts, and then you sat on the curb, you said, for a couple of hours.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us any more detail about the kinds of... Was this pleasurable?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was quite pleasurable in the sense that that we just weren't in the same world. We were in our normal world, but we weren't really there. Like I said, it was almost as if we were watching ourselves going through these things from another person's perspective.
Uh-huh.
Almost like being God and sitting up on a cloud or something and watching what goes on to someone.
Wow. And did you have weird distorted thoughts during this, or?
Sure. We would look at things and go, boy, wouldn't it be interesting to walk out in front of that car and see what happens?
I see.
And while that's not a good idea, that's not going to do you any good. Still, it's kind of interesting in that particular situation when you're not feeling pain, and you fall down on your face and it doesn't hurt. Gee, what had happened if a car hit me? Or, what happened if I got run over by the train?
Yeah. And so this was an urban experience.
Yes.
In the south side of Chicago.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
And this was at night.
No, it was actually during the day.
Okay.
And that's what made it so interesting was the fact that everything was light out. We were safe. Nothing seemed out of line.
Uh-huh.
To anyone else, other than the fact that we were just completely blown.
And so after you went back again for the second time to the Dunkin' Donuts and you had another experience, what happened next?
Well, a friend of ours came along in a car and picked us up, and we went out cruising around, and we all got high again. I rolled another joint.
With PCP?
Yeah,
again.
and so we smoked that, and so me and the friend who had already gotten high were real high at that point. We were just really out there. And starting to have trouble talking and just kind of sitting there like this in the car, leaned up against the window. And my friend took us over to his girlfriend's house, and they got in a big fight, and then we had to leave. And because he was so high and so upset from fighting with her, he couldn't drive and made me do it without a license.
I see. So you had no license, and you were really high on PCP, but somehow... You drove the car anyway, huh?
Right, and I was doing pretty good, except for the fact that there was no front license plate on the car. That's what got us pulled over.
I see.
And
And so the police pulled you over.
yeah, yeah, and I couldn't remember getting out of the car and walking to the back of the car and putting my hands on the back of the car, but apparently I did it okay because I didn't get a DUI.
So they couldn't tell that you were really high, apparently.
No, no, we went through the whole thing. You know, it was just for not having a license, which isn't a real big offense or anything.
Right.
And they took me down to the station and they put me in a cell and we're talking and, you know, communicating. They're calling somebody to come and get me and all. Since I don't have a car anymore, you know, my friends drove the car away.
And so you're sitting there in a cell, high on PCP, and the cops seem not to know that you're
Yeah, they
completely out of your gourd.
Well, they're not charging me with anything, you know,
Uh-huh.
and certainly if they had any clue as to how high I was, they, you know, I would have been in trouble.
Yeah.
And they let me go within an hour. I mean,
see.
I came down pretty quick in the cell, but, you know, sitting there in a cell on PCP, you want out.
Sure. I imagine that predominated your
Yeah.
your experience. Were you still hallucinating while you were sitting in the cell?
No. By that, getting arrested and taken down to the station was pretty much a sobering experience.
Yeah,
you know,
I can imagine,
the adrenaline rush that started, I think, from the point I knew I was in trouble, and are they going to figure out that I'm high, kind of brought me down. The adrenaline that started pumping at that point. I found a lot of times when something dramatic happens when you're high, adrenaline will bring you down.
Uh-huh. That's interesting. And so after they released you, were you still high on PCP at that point?
No, I was pretty much down.
You were pretty
from
much
it.
down then.
You know, maybe some residual effects, you know, minor stuff, but
And so how long was the whole experience? From the time you smoked the first joint with PCP, and then of course you smoked a second joint with PCP, you said. And then
yeah, it was probably about a 6 or 7 hour experience total.
with the two doses.
Right.
6 or 7 hours. And then did you sleep normally the night after, or does it interfere with sleep?
No, it didn't tend to interfere with sleep. You could go to sleep once you were done with the effects.
Uh-huh.
You know, if you were high for 6 hours, you know, maybe 7 hours later you could go to sleep. 7 hours from the time you had took it.
Yeah. And then the next day, how did you feel?
Okay, it's not as draining as MDMA or acid can sometimes be.
Uh-huh. So you felt reasonably normal the day after.
Yeah. It doesn't seem to have the residual side effects that carry over into the next day, like some other psychedelics, and
Yeah.
and so it's a little more pleasurable in that sense too. As long as you keep a grip on what's going on, it can be a fun ride. But a lot of people tend to lose their grip on reality because they don't feel like they're there.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything else you want to tell us about this particular experience?
No.
All right. Well,
so.
it's a great story. It's fascinating to hear something about a different drug. So I really want to thank you for being with us. You're a great guest.
Thanks.
Thanks. And maybe you have a psychedelic odyssey that you would like to share with us on TV. If you do, we would love to hear from you and put you on the air. And so please contact me. I'm Jim Leonard. Contact me at Mystère Studios at the number that appears on your screen. Thank you for joining us. Hope to see you again.